Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. It's been nearly a month since a powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck central Myanmar, killing over 3,700 people and injuring thousands more. Yesterday, the military junta extended its ceasefire after meeting with Malaysian President Anwar Ibrahim in Bangkok for rare backroom talks with ASEAN. Now, is this disaster a brief window of pause for peace and cooperation, or does the humanitarian response risk becoming another front in Myanmar's civil war? Well, joining me now on the show to discuss this further is Alexander Matheou, Asia Pacific Regional Director for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC. Alexander, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. Maybe you can begin our conversation today by giving us a bit of an overview of the current humanitarian situation in Myanmar following those the devastating earthquake and the aftershocks that came after.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, when you drive into Mandalay at the moment, it's not immediately striking that something huge has happened, because the earthquake has hit houses and buildings quite sporadically. So you might see one side of a street is unaffected, and then you look to your left and several houses are destroyed. You might find one street that looks totally intact, and you might go to another and half of the houses or more are flattened. You go past temples or churches and mosques, and many of those buildings have been totally destroyed. One of the striking features you see at the moment is hundreds of thousands of people are living on the streets, because it's not possible to go back because the houses have been destroyed, or because it's not safe to go back because the houses have been partially damaged and they no longer feel comfortable sleeping in them because there are constant aftershocks. Now, the presence of so many people living on the streets is, of course, a huge humanitarian and logistics challenge, because they don't have access to clean drinking water, don't have access to latrines. It's difficult to stay hygienic. It's difficult to cook. All of these, and it's not always safe. There's lots of women and children sleeping out in parks full of strangers. So it's an unnerving situation with aftershocks and living outside in extreme heat and the monsoon coming. And of course, what people really want is to go home as soon as they can.
All right. So talk to me about your work there. The IFRC has been there addressing the issues of the humanitarian crisis even before the earthquake. Right now, what are the primary challenges you face in delivering aid to those who need it the most affected areas? Where do you see the needs to be most urgent?
Well, it's good that you started by saying the work before the earthquake, because if you take Sagaing Township, for example, the epicenter of the earthquake, there were around 1.5 million displaced people in Sagaing, already staying in monasteries or in mosques sometimes churches supported, but mostly it was monasteries. Now, many of those buildings have been destroyed. So you have people who were already displaced and vulnerable, now doubly vulnerable, because their one opportunity for shelter and protection has been taken away from them. So what are the immediate needs at the moment? The most immediate needs are related to the fact that people are living on the street, sleeping outside in extreme heat, sleeping on the floor. It's a huge health risk, because cooking and staying clean is very difficult in those environments, very easy to fall sick. The monsoon rains will start soon. People are sleeping on the floor. That is going to be extremely uncomfortable. And generally that sense of where is your next meal coming from? Where can you get clean drinking water? How do you stay clean and healthy while living on the streets under a tarpaulin? Now, credit to Myanmar, they really do help each other in times of crisis. So it's not just monks and monasteries, although they have been fantastic. It's local businesses, neighbors, they come out, they look after each other. But in the long run, it won't be enough, because ultimately, what is the solution? There's only one solution. People need to go back home. That means clearing rubble for hundreds of thousands of houses and reconstructing them. Now, that is a huge enterprise. For us at the moment, big priority, keep people sheltered, fed, clean water, given medical care that they need while they're living on the streets. But our big long-term priority is to support that return home.
Okay, well, let's talk about the short term then. The temporary ceasefire that was declared by the military junta, had that helped in terms of access to relief efforts, or are you still finding that there are limitations to access, and that the ceasefire really doesn't actually improve the situation?
Well, it is helpful because some of the affected populations live in areas where control is contested, and therefore special permissions and need to be received in order to get access to those communities. I would say that this particular earthquake, the vast majority of affected people are in areas that are largely accessible and can be accessible to humanitarian organizations.
Okay.
So the conflict itself heavily shapes Myanmar. It massively shapes the quality of life in the country. It's fundamentally changed the lives of all those millions of people who have been displaced or are stuck in areas affected by fighting. But this particular earthquake has largely been in areas less directly affected by conflict and are therefore more accessible to humanitarian organizations. Now, ultimately, Myanmar, for many, many years, has been one of the top 10 most vulnerable countries in the world, and that is related to conflict. And any hope for peace is going to start with ceasefires that at least allow people to receive basic life-saving assistance. So we don't know how long this will last. We hope it'll last a long time. But it's the sort of thing you would want to see and need to see in order to have hope for peace.
Right. Just focusing a little bit more on the urgency of the short-term needs. You talked about the monsoon rains coming and with so many displaced individuals and lacking proper shelter and sanitation. How concerned are you about potential disease outbreaks? Are you getting ahead of that? Is there something measures being put in place to prevent those the risk of a potential disease outbreak?
I think it is a major concern at the moment. If you go there right now this week, you would go into football fields or parks, you would see many, many tents or plastic sheets. People will be staying away from the tents because of the extreme heat in the day, but they will be sheltered there in the night. You would see that they are not easily accessing clean water. Many of them don't have access to soap, and many of them don't have ways of cleaning their cooking utensils. So right now, that risk of health outbreaks is really quite high. Now, there's nothing inevitable about it staying that way. We're, for example, shipping in 200 metric tons of relief items, soaps, hygiene kits, things that people will need to stay clean and healthy and to protect themselves and their loved ones while they're living outside, even during the monsoon rains. So if that humanitarian operation can move fast enough, if everyone can be given adequate shelter, soap, cooking materials, access to clean water, then you should be able to prevent the worst outbreak. But right now, I think there's really reason to be nervous.
Okay. Are you seeing, Alexander, you and your team, are you seeing efforts to address some of the removing the rubble and getting people back to their homes safely so they can have proper shelter? Is that being done, or is right now still the focus on immediate humanitarian aid dispersion?
Melissa, it must be both, because the two things, one has to start while the other is still going on. Because clearing the rubble away will take a long time. Right now, there is nowhere near enough equipment to clear that rubble. There's a few private contractors who are being hired out by wealthier families or by, for example, some of the churches and the monasteries are trying to clear up quickly. But there is nowhere near enough to meet the demand from so many families. Plus, the less wealthy ones may not be able to afford the price of clearing that rubble. So that's where I think we can come in and help. But the two things will happen at the same time. Hundreds of thousands of people will stay living on the streets while the rubble is being cleared. So we want to move forward as quickly as we can with both. Probably the best thing for us to do is to give as much money as possible directly into the hands of the people who have been affected, the poorest ones, so they can hire people or companies to clear away their rubble and reconstruct their homes. That's probably easier than us trying to do it for so many people. And ultimately, when you ask people now, what do they want most? Of course, they need soap and clean water and shelter. They're worried about today. But more than anything, they're worried about tomorrow. So it's people ask for cash support. They want to go home, and that's how I think we can really help them in the long term.
They need support to rebuild their lives. They want to be hopeful for the future. Alexander, what then would you say to the international community watching this crisis unfold right now, particularly also from a regional standpoint? Malaysians today watching, as we are chair of ASEAN, and we take pride in that, but what can we do to be more effective, not just in supporting from a diplomacy standpoint, but also in helping people on the ground?
Well, we start with compassion and solidarity. An earthquake can happen to anybody. Nobody's to blame for it. Life was ticking along as normal for many people in a difficult way in Myanmar, but ticking along as normal, and then suddenly something absolutely out of their control happened and fundamentally changed their lives. It took thousands of lives, left lots of people shocked and heartbroken, and many more, hundreds of thousands, without their homes. It's the moment when solidarity between neighbors, regional neighbors, and the global community is very, very necessary. ASEAN, I think, plays a particular role in mobilizing that first response, getting in search and rescue teams, getting in medicines. Some of the ASEAN neighbors have done that particularly well, so we're very, very grateful to them. But I would say this, both to ASEAN and the global community, the recovery is going to last a lot longer than the news story. And it will take commitment, time, and effort to get hundreds of thousands of people from the streets into homes so they can restore something of a normal life. There's no one agency that is able to do that. It's something that we all need to do together. ASEAN, individuals who are willing to contribute, the global community, everyone can help. But if we do it well, within the next 6 to 12 months, the majority of people who have been displaced can be back home. If we don't do it well, if we neglect them, or if we fail to raise enough money or to engage constructively in their recovery, then this extremely vulnerable country, already full of displacement, is going to have 200,000 or 300,000 more destitute people. And that's not good for Myanmar, it's not good for the region, not good for the world.
Alexander, thank you so much for being on the show today. Alexander Matheou, Asia Pacific Regional Director for IFRC. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the Myanmar crisis. Almost a month after that devastating 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck on March 28th and the following aftershocks. Now, could the aftermath of the earthquake shift the balance of Myanmar's civil war? Joining me on the show to discuss this further is Moe Thuzar, who is a senior fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. She's also the coordinator of its Myanmar Studies Programme, and prior to joining ISEAS, she spent close to 10 years at the ASEAN Secretariat. Moe, welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining me. Can you begin by sharing how you see, or to what extent you see the March 28th earthquake, whether that has reshaped Myanmar's internal conflict? Has it created any significant shifts in dynamics between the military regime and resistance forces?
Thanks for having me back on the show, Melissa. It's always good to continue the conversation, albeit it's a very sad, tragic topic that we're talking about, of course. And at the outset, may I also just express my sympathy and condolences to all the people and communities in Myanmar who have suffered from yet another tragedy, adding to the staggering toll that they've been going through since 2021 and the coup. Your question's really interesting about the extent to which this recent earthquake has the potential to reshape the internal conflict raging on in Myanmar. I think at this point, it's maybe a bit hard for me to see how the dynamics might change. And why I say this is because the earthquake hit areas are mainly in, in central Myanmar, those areas, the Mandalay region, Sagaing region, and the Naypyidaw Federal Territory. And these are areas that are largely under the military regime, the State Administration Council, or the SAC as the acronym. These are areas under the SAC's administrative control. So, of course, we do see that some of the smaller towns in the earthquake hit region may have what you might call weakened governance or administrative assertion from the center, from Naypyidaw. And they might also be in those areas, those smaller towns and so on. They might also be in those areas where the resistance against the military are also contesting the military's reach and assertion. So I think those dynamics are there. And what we've seen, of course, is that the Myanmar military, the SAC, has tried to take advantage of the various ceasefires that were announced for humanitarian reasons after the earthquake, and also taking advantage of earlier brokered ceasefires with some of the ethnic armed organizations to try and renegotiate some terms to either regain or resume territorial and administrative control in some parts of northern Shan state. So these are all happening while, of course, the focus of the region and the world at large would be on the aftermath of the earthquake. So we're trying to just look at all of these shifting dynamics.
Okay. Well, the International Red Cross said that the ceasefire has really helped them in terms of distributing aid to the hardest hit areas. Talk to me about the ceasefire. How genuine is it? Is it likely to hold? How fragile are we thinking? Because the military regime has extended the post-earthquake truce till the end of the month, if I'm not mistaken. How do we think about this ceasefire?
That's a really interesting and important question, Melissa, because there have been earlier attempts at different types of ceasefire with different ethnic armed groups since the coup. And what's different, of course, is this current ceasefire is for humanitarian reasons. And I think the kind of attention and even pressure, if I could use that word, from various ASEAN members, particularly current ASEAN chair Malaysia, of course, really pushing for extending the ceasefire so that humanitarian access humanitarian assistance could be reached, could reach the communities that really need them, and for whoever wishes to deliver and provide humanitarian assistance, including medical support and relief, of course, reaches and accesses those areas. I think that's the main concern. And here, of course, if we are looking at it under the ASEAN framework, there are these intergovernmental concerns about the country that needs the assistance has to request for it, and even if assistance is offered, say, by regional neighbors, it has to be something that that assistance, once it reaches the ground in Myanmar, needs to be kind of like coordinated, or delivery needs to be coordinated by the requesting party. So in this case, the requesting party is the State Administration Council, the military regime, and that brings into question of how much needed assistance reaches the communities that are in need. What is the priority? What is the triage? Because, of course, we have visible destruction in places like Naypyidaw, the capital. But, the epicenter is in areas like in Sagaing, which I understand is where the Malaysian humanitarian teams really tried very hard to negotiate access to. So I think despite all these, the complexities of getting access and reaching communities in needs, what we're also seeing, you mentioned the ceasefire. despite ceasefire announcements, even after extending them, we've also seen the SAC continuing with airstrikes in several areas, including the peripheral parts of central Myanmar, which is where the earthquake struck. And up to mid-April, of course, they are continuing ongoing monitoring, but up to mid-April, those that were really monitoring the incidents of the airstrikes were reporting that there have been over 20. And so this is something, this raises, I think for researchers like myself, this raises more questions about how the military regime actually interprets its ceasefire announcements, similar to how the State Administration Council regime also interpreted the 5-point consensus after, agreeing to it with the 9 ASEAN heads of state and government way back in April 2021.
All right. Well, you referenced the meeting with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim in Bangkok to negotiate the extension of the ceasefire. I'm curious about that because ASEAN has largely sidelined the military junta since the 2021 coup. I'm wondering what this recent engagement with Prime Minister Anwar, that meeting in Thailand, what does that signal about ASEAN's current position in meeting with the SAC? Are there signs that maybe the military regime is using this disaster to try and reset its international image, or maybe even consolidate its power internationally or regionally?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Melissa. It's an important point to raise, particularly in the context of Prime Minister Anwar's recent meeting with the chairman of the State Administration Council, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. I think we need to differentiate between ASEAN summits that involve the heads of state and government from all the ASEAN members, and meetings that are held, say, for example, what has just taken place recently in Bangkok, meetings that are held as an initiative of the ASEAN chair in a specific context to push for more acquiescence from the State Administration Council chief in this current post-earthquake situation. And as we were talking earlier, the ASEAN countries actually called for ceasefires as a humanitarian pause. So that's one part. Of course, up to now, the ASEAN countries are still upholding or holding the line on the decision that was made since October 2021 by the ASEAN foreign ministers, in the SAC foreign ministers' presence as well, to restrict the SAC's attendance at high-level political meetings, such as the ASEAN Summit, restricting that attendance to a non-political representative only. And since 2022, that restriction was expanded to the foreign ministers' meeting. So, from a researcher's point of view, I think I have to be clear that meeting a military regime which has, been so intransigent about implementing the 5-point consensus to which it had agreed to, I think we have to be clear that meeting in a specific context, such as pushing for humanitarian access, is different from inviting the junta back to the ASEAN table. And, my institute, the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, runs these annual surveys called the State of Southeast Asia Survey. So for this year's survey findings for the Myanmar question, we do see that regionally, appetites for, inviting the military regime back to the ASEAN table, such reinstatement, appetites are even lower this year. In fact, there is more preference regionally to impose harder measures on the State Administration Council to increase the cost of its non-compliance with the 5-point consensus. I think there was a second part to your question. I'm sorry, I may have missed it in talking about differentiation.
You've answered it beautifully. It was whether or not the military regime is using this disaster to reset its international image. I do want to ask you, in the very brief time that we have left, the minute or so that we have left, what will you be watching out for, Moe, in the near future, in the coming weeks or so, as Myanmar tries to recover from this disaster?
Well, the situation in Myanmar is, it's fluid, it's constantly evolving, that's almost a truism. But that is the situation. And so what we can try to watch for from where we're sitting is how the different political actors are reacting to this critical moment, the different political actors in Myanmar. So the earthquake's immediate impacts have been devastating on a people who've already been suffering from the effects of the conflict and the cycle of violence that has spiraled since 2021, and now the earthquake. So the recovery needs from the earthquake are still emerging, and those recovery needs and the longer-term reconstruction costs. Who will bear the cost of reconstruction? I think all of these, require this kind of medium to long-term perspective of why it's important to continue caring about what happens in Myanmar, because there have been spillover effects in this region from the Myanmar crisis. There will be spillover effects continuing, to which the earthquake's impact will only add.
Moe, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Moe Thuzar there from the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.